We're finally at the home stretch, everybody. Anyways, welcome back, true believers and all you spectacular Spidey fans, to another very exciting episode of Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales 101. And with there being only a little over 2 weeks left until this game's worldwide release on November 12th, the overall amount of hype that Miles has been garnering recently has still been going strong, primarily thanks to none other than Game Informer. Although, based on this recent post from the editor-in-chief over at Game Informer magazine of Andrew Reiner, he did basically say that this is in fact going to be our very last week of coverage from the magazine until the game's launch in November. Not only that, but it also seems like we've already seen the entirety of the new Miles Morales footage that Game Informer had to offer. And instead, throughout the last week of October, I would expect for us to simply receive a lot more developer insights as to how exactly Insomniac and Marvel are fully crafting Miles Morales from the ground up. But in case you missed any of Game Informer's key coverage for Miles Morales in the slightest, you are actually able to fully read their cover story for free on their website, which I will leave as a link in the description below so you can go and check it out for yourself. And overall, everybody, I just want to give another major shout out to Andrew Reiner and the entire crew over at Game Informer for fully providing us an entire month's worth of hype relating to none other than our favorite web-slinger. The amount of coverage that Spider-Man PS4 received all the way back in April of 2018 was easily one of, if not the biggest highlights of hype leading up to the game's main launch. And seeing that we're experiencing the exact same thing leading up to the main launch of Miles Morales thanks to Game Informer is just an absolute delight. So even though we may not be receiving that much new footage for Miles Morales this week in comparison to the previous weeks from Game Informer, I still am very intrigued to learn exactly how Insomniac crafted the game from their own unique perspective. So if you're someone like me who absolutely loves learning about the ins and outs as to how exactly video games are made, then I highly suggest that you stay tuned to Game Informer for all the latest Miles Morales updates. But as for the main news that doesn't relate to Game Informer, there actually is quite a lot to go over. The first of which surprisingly doesn't relate directly to Game Informer or Insomniac games, but actually comes straight from PlayStation Lifestyle, where they specifically discovered that Miles Morales on both the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 is indeed going to come equipped with a day one patch, only sizing at a little bit over 9 gigabytes. So even though it's nothing entirely new for fresh games to come entailed with a day one patch, it's still nice to be aware of ahead of time so that way you do have enough storage space to be put on your PlayStation 4 or your brand new PlayStation 5, which will already be added on top of the amount of storage that is featured within the standard version of Miles Morales, as well as the game's Ultimate Edition, which is exclusively on PS5, which also comes equipped with the Marvel Spider-Man Remaster. And just to refresh all of your memories, you will need to have at least 50 gigabytes worth of storage for the standard version of Miles Morales, both on PS4 and PS5, and at least over 105 gigabytes worth of storage for the Ultimate Edition of Miles Morales with Marvel Spider-Man Remastered exclusively on PlayStation 5. But as the PlayStation Lifestyle article went on to describe, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales went gold earlier this month, Insomniac Games announced. Of course, with a considerable amount of time left to spare before launch, the team remains hard at work on tackling bug fixes and the like. As such, it's no wonder that a pretty sizable patch will accompany the title on day one. If details on patch tracker website Orbis Patches proves correct, the new Spidey adventure could launch with a 9 gigabyte update. SP first spotted the Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales listing on Orbis. It's worth noting that an image of the game and its title doesn't pop up on the site when searching for the information. Instead, typing Miles Morales into Orbis's search function leads to a page filed as CUSA17722. And according to this listing, patch 1.01 will boast a file size of 9.2 gigabytes. Since the page lacks patch notes, there is presently no way of knowing what specifically patch 1.01 addresses. However, given the fact that this is your typical launch day patch, I would simply expect some minor bug fixes to occur as well as some possible frame rate issues to be resolved. Regardless, it's nice to know that Insomniac is continuing to polish the game even after it's already gone gold. And speaking of Insomniac, we did receive another massive boatload of information from them directly relating to a massive facet about Miles Morales, which surprisingly relates directly to the game's trophies. Now, alongside of Insomniac listing a fairly sizable amount of trophies for Miles Morales that we are able to unlock, they also posted a brand new Daily Bugle article which does dive further into the character of Rio Morales. However, for this article in particular, it pretty much reaffirms information that we're already aware of for Rio's involvement in the story. So if you want to read the entire Daily Bugle post yourself, I will leave a link to it in the description below. As for the trophies, the same situation applies here too, where I won't read every single trophy that Insomniac listed on their recent Twitter thread, but I will highlight the most important ones that do pertain to some information that hasn't been revealed yet about the game. So as Insomniac initially posted on Twitter, do you like trophies? We do. Check out this partial list of trophies you can expect in Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. And just to list those 3 right off the bat, which are pretty self-explanatory: Be Yourself, which is the platinum trophy of collecting all the other trophies, just the beginning of unlocking all the skills, and a new home where you have to 100% complete all districts. So the majority of the trophies that Insomniac did go on to list are pretty much what I like to call completionist trophies, where basically just like how Spider-Man PS4 was an extremely easy platinum trophy for a lot of people to obtain, the same situation can be applied here for Miles Morales. Now, some of the trophies that do appear here directly pertain to the game's story beats, as well as particular combat scenarios that you do have to fulfill. But what I find the most interesting are the trophies that relate specifically to the game's collectibles. In comparison to Spider-Man PS4, we did have the side objectives of trying to go around the city and collect backpacks, as well as take photos of specific landmarks and try and take out enemy bases. And while the enemy bases do reappear here for Miles Morales, both in regards to the underground and Roxxon, we also have the side task of going around Manhattan and collecting time capsules, postcards, and underground caches. We also know that one of the collectibles within Miles Morales is also going to relate directly to music. And knowing that the majority of collectibles within Spider-Man PS4 heavily connected to Peter Parker's character on a personal level, it makes me that much more interested to see exactly how unique Miles is going to be in regards to his collectibles. But moving on to a more combat-centric objective, we do have a trophy titled Never Saw It Coming, where in this instance, the player has to fully complete an enemy base without being detected. And I don't know about you guys, but that directly tells me that we now have the ability to fully complete enemy bases without having the need to fight them in full-on combat. And instead, the enemy bases within Miles Morales can in fact be 100% completed simply by using stealth. Given the fact that Miles also has the enhancement of his camouflage ability, it's surely going to give us as the player a major edge during a lot of different combat scenarios. And in a turn of events, this may or may not actually relate to the next trophy on the list titled Pete's First Villain, where in this instance, you simply have to complete the final test. Now, even though I'm not entirely sure what exactly it means by the final test and whether or not it could actually relate to the game's story, I do think that another possibility for this trophy's description actually relates to the hologram challenges that Peter has scattered for Miles throughout New York City. To throw back once again to Spider-Man PS4 and the side missions that were featured in that game, once you actually managed to complete the Taskmaster and Screwball challenges, you were then able to fight and or chase them in a specific boss sequence. So if something similar like that happens within Miles' game, where we may have to fight off against a hologram version of Peter, that would just be flat out awesome. But on the flip side, this trophy could also be taken literally, where within the universe of Spider-Man PS4, the first major superpowered foe that Peter actually faced off against was actually that of Electro. But as far as non-superpowered people go, we also have a villain which was previously teased in Spider-Man PS4, but we didn't actually see him in person within the game itself. And that is actually relating to none other than the Chameleon. So while your guess is as good as mine as to what exactly this trophy's description could be referring to, it's still going to be very intriguing to see exactly how much of a role Peter does have within Miles' game once he is out of New York City. Now, even though this next trophy could potentially relate to a possible story beat that does occur within Miles Morales, I do think that it's actually a small side objective that we can do in the game by simply swinging around as Spider-Man. Because in this instance, this trophy is specifically described as I'm on a boat. Ride the derelict boat in southern Chinatown. So once again, within Miles Morales' game, the entirety of Marvel's Manhattan is fully open to explore. And as far as districts go, every single area within the game is now going to be revitalized with the current winter setting. But if it turns out that Insomniac actually incorporated more detail within these districts, it's surely going to make them that much more interesting to fully explore. Because if the description of this trophy is possibly teasing anything, I actually hope that we might have the option to go and take a boat towards the Statue of Liberty. Considering that it seems like Insomniac have already fully mastered the traversal for Miles Morales within this game, I do think the option of actually taking boats to specific locales would just be the cherry on top of this game's open world exploration. Now, as for the final trophy that I do want to highlight on this list, prominently relates to a core story story element that was heavily featured within Spider-Man PS4, where of course, if you did manage to visit the New York cemetery, you were able to pay your respects to none other than Uncle Ben. And considering the fate of his dad from the first game, it only makes sense for it to reappear here within Miles Morales. And as you would expect, this trophy is titled Never Give Up. Pay respects at Jefferson Davis's grave in Harlem. Again, this is surely going to be another easy platinum for all of us players to obtain once we do end up playing Miles Morales for ourselves. But at the same time, it does look like Insomniac have fleshed out the trophies a little bit more to try and further encourage players to experience the most that Miles Morales has to offer. And if that was just a taste of the trophies that Insomniac put within their Twitter thread, I can only imagine what the other trophies are going to be by the time the full game releases. Now, as for the final bit of news to discuss today, actually relates to a core character that we already have confirmation of to be within this game, but we've now pretty much received our first full look of the character as one of the main villains. However, I will say that this first look of the character might potentially be seen as a spoiler for some of you who don't want to actually see the character until you play the game for yourselves. So in case you don't want that element of the game ruined for you, I would actually recommend to click off the video now, because in all reality, this is a pretty massive reveal that Insomniac let happen. So as this insane reveal was actually initially posted by the LBG on Twitter, he did go on to state, "So dope. Saw this artist on Venice Beach working on an ad for Insomniac Games' Spider-Man Miles Morales, another title I worked on. This looks great, and the finished product is going to look amazing." And as you can see within the picture, the artist is clearly creating a full mural to fully encapsulate the core characters that are going to be featured within Miles Morales. But on the far right side of this mural, clear as day, we do have our first unofficial look of Aaron Davis as none other than the Prowler, who, in my opinion, I do believe is eventually going to become the main antagonist of the entire game. And even though this artwork isn't even finished yet, I think his design looks absolutely incredible. I also thoroughly love the inclusion of the classic suit's design within this newer costume, mainly with the implementation of the classic emblem as well as the iconic mask. Now, even though I do find it a bit weird that Insomniac actually decided to repost this artwork, which does showcase something so important to the overall aesthetic of the game, which primarily showcases a villain which we haven't actually received official confirmation of yet, I'm still absolutely in love with every single character's design within this game's universe. And as for whether or not we may actually end up receiving a small glimpse of the Prowler before Miles Morales actually releases, we'll just have to wait and see. But nonetheless, I'm still extremely excited to see exactly where the narrative is going to go in relation to both Miles and Aaron. And with all that said, everyone, that's the video I have for you today, and please let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. What do you think about all this Miles Morales news, and out of all the trophies that you heard me describe, which one are you the most intrigued by? If anything, I think the most important highlight out of all these trophies is now being able to fully take down an enemy base by simply using nothing but stealth. This is surely going to add a whole lot more variety when it does come to the enemy encounters. And knowing that Insomniac is also further expanding the stealth with the inclusion of wall and ceiling takedowns is going to make it that much more entertaining. But until the next news update, everyone, thank you all so much for watching. Stay spectacular, Spidey fans. Feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy. And without further ado, peace out.
Hey, Uncle Ben. Miss you. Doing my best to make you proud.